Hey, how you guys doing tonight? Niner Nuts back with another episode. This one actually is a little more different than covering the current San Francisco 49ers in the 2023 season. What this episode is basically about, actually, it sat on my mind for a little while to make this episode, but listening to the podcast with Terrell Owens on the patrickbetdavid Valuetainment was very interesting and very shocking to some extent, especially with the comments he made about, and I'm not trying to talk for him here, but I believe what he had said was, given that the talent that he had, and I think if he was able to play in the era, I forget a little bit. Whatever he kind of said that he believes that he could have broke all of Jerry Rice's records had he would have continued to play. Now, I'm gonna play a couple of excerpts from that podcast just to give you guys an idea. If you didn't hear it, if you did hear it, I apologize. But if you did hear it, if you didn't hear it, definitely go back and listen because it is very interesting. Um, it's one of the first long view interviews I've heard with him. I know he's also on All That Smoke, which is very interesting. I have to give that a listen. But let's just start off. Let me just start off by saying that T.O.'s a guy who obviously was one of the best wide receivers who ever played the game, hands down. I know he didn't have a chip. He did play on some very bad teams during his career. He did get to a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles where they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was the game in which he had missed a lot of time with the broken foot and then come back sort of 60 to 70% fully healed. But I think he was always one of those guys who was an extremely gifted physical specimen who learned how to become great and learn how to put all his stuff together and become one of the top wide receivers. Now, of course, he did have a lot of controversy along in his career, whether he was insulting Jeff Garcia or Tony Romo, whatever else he's done in the past. I know he shunned his Hall of Fame thing. I'm just naming them. I'm not trying to put the man down. I would never do that because I would say where I agree and disagree with him. I mean, I always thought that, for the most part, I thought that I loved some of his antics when he ran to the star in the middle of Texas Stadium and stood there and strutted and tried to do it again. I mean, that's memorable. I love that. I love when he scored a touchdown and he would have those extravagant celebrations, like when he was dancing with all the cheerleaders. He took the pom pom. I mean, he was known well for that. He was definitely. I don't want to say he was a Dennis Rodman like character for football because he wasn't as I don't think he wasn't his actions weren't bad. I just think some of the things that came out of his mouth at times were could have been dealt with a little different. Then we saw the breakdown, when he was crying about the Tony Romo and all that stuff. So he's always been a very interesting person to follow on and off the field. But again, he also has the second, the catch too against the Green Bay Packers from Steve Young. I mean, he's has the most catches in a single game, right, against the Chicago Bears. I have that game. I still have that game. I remember that game, and I believe that was Jerry Rice's last game as a 49er. That's another thing. He played under Jerry Rice. As I mean, he wasn't a first round draft pick like J.J. Stokes was, but he was. Think about that trio they had at one time: Rice, Stokes, and Owens. That was pretty darn good. And then he went on to stake his own claim with San Francisco. I hated when they got rid of him. I hated when he went to Philadelphia, but it was a different time. The team was going through a transition. But whatever the case may be, he then went on to play in Philadelphia. He then went to Dallas. He then went to Buffalo. He then went to Cincinnati. And according to him, he feels he could still play now at the age of 49. Well, if you look at his videos on Instagram and you see him working out, he's in tip-top shape. And look, in today's game, I'm sure he still could play. I think he says he could play between 30 to 40 snaps, not all the snaps, obviously, but which I really respect because he's being very truthful. And he said that he would be a huge red zone asset had he played today. So I thought it was really interesting to make an episode about this because, again, like he's always been a guy that I've been a huge fan of, despite all the haters, despite all the people who didn't like him. You know, talent is what talent is, and he was one of the most talented wide receivers of all time. Could he have broken all of Rice's records had he would have played a little longer? I don't know. Being biased because I feel that Jerry Rice is the greatest athlete and football player of all time, I want to say no. I don't want to see Jerry Rice's records ever broken because it just seems to me that it's something that is up there that is beyond sacred in football and as being a 49er fan. I'm sure a lot of you guys will agree with me that we don't ever want to see those records broken because Rice is the greatest wide receiver of all time. Even if his records were to be broken, let's just say for argument's sake, there'll never be another. And obviously we don't want to see that happen because he did it in over several different times when the game was the toughest in the 80s into the 90s when it changed, and even later on in his career when he was still getting 1,000-yard seasons in his late 30s and early 40s with the Oakland Raiders teamed with Tim Brown and with Rich Gannon. So, you know, obviously it's one of those things we would never want to see broken. I don't think Owens is a better wide receiver than Jerry Rice. That's just my overall opinion. Like I said, Jerry Rice is the alpha and the omega for me. I do think that Terrell Owens is in the top tier wide receivers of all time as great as, yes, I do. I think he was. Do I think he was better than Randy Moss? Yes, I do, even though Randy Moss has a chip. I think individually, Owens had a lot more talent. He also covers going over why he was better than Randy Moss in this interview. I also think that he was better than Calvin Megatron Johnson by far. I don't even think it's a comparison. I think that Owens was just such a physical specimen who just had such great ability, whether it was catching the ball, whether it was yards after the catch. I mean, he was one of the very few once in a lifetime type of players. I think he was better than Larry Fitz too, and I have nothing but the most deepest respect for Larry Fitz. I think Larry Fitz was similar to him in terms of being a very good physical specimen, a very good athlete, and a very hard worker. But again, I think Terrell Owens was the total package, and I think he's one of many players that definitely deserve to have a Super Bowl, definitely deserve to have, you know, a lot more positive accolades put on him. But again, we know that too. A lot of things that were put on him were somewhat negative, and that's why it's so interesting and good to see long form of conversation with him on these two podcasts. So I'm going to just play a couple of excerpts and then, just talk about it afterwards. So just bear with me.
Because that was now I'm starting to play. This is year 3. Now I'm starting to really play alongside Jerry Rice, J.J. Stokes, Brent Jones, Steve Young. I mean, I'm starting to be a part of that offense. And so for 3 years, I got a chance to watch highlights of Jerry. I got to watch practices of Jerry. I got to watch playoff games of Jerry and how he performed. And I wanted to be somewhat like him. I wanted to be that star, and I think I put so much pressure on myself to make a play every time that I touched the ball that it was counterproductive. Like it was just something that just went wrong. I had a fumble. I dropped a touchdown. I mean, there were passes that literally I watched into my hand after a couple of passes dropped. I went to the sideline and my coach was like, "Man, just watch." My teammate, he's like, "Man, just watch it all the way into your hand." But this is my 3rd year. It's not like I don't know how to catch, but this for me, I'm thinking, okay.
All right, so obviously he's talking about the Green Bay game in which he made that big catch from Steve Young. If you do go back in that game, it was a tough one, and I really respect him for pointing that out. You know, a lot of people wouldn't point out the negative on themselves to kind of just show the light on the positive, but of course he does say how it was a rough game, and he was in his 3rd year, and he also said earlier that it wasn't until that Green Bay game that he really started to put everything together. So I give him a lot of respect because he's very honest in this interview, and he's also extremely intelligent, which I don't think the media really has portrayed well. I was really blown away by how intelligent he was, and I was really respectful and blown away and humbled by his upbringing. He unfortunately didn't have a dad. He did have a dad, but his dad wasn't around. He was raised by his grandmother, and he talks about how big a role his grandmother played in his life, and it's just wonderful to see him overcome those odds, and turn out to be the fantastic athlete that he was. So that's another aspect I think that should be shined on him. And again, like these things that we see sometimes, we don't know, obviously, because he played in an era where there were no podcasts, there were no long form of conversation. That's the wonderful thing about these podcasts today is we have long form of conversation, whether it's with a politician, someone running for office, some type of entrepreneur, someone in the exercise world, someone talking about supplements, vitamins, and athletes. And a lot of the time, hopefully that they're going to be somewhat truthful, and that's what I really respect about him, because at this point in his life, at 49, he no longer is playing in the NFL, and he has no reason not to tell it like it is. So, it was good to see him say how he wanted to be something like Jerry Rice, and obviously, Jerry Rice was the pinnacle for everybody, the workhorse. He's, again, like I said, the greatest wide receiver ever. I think that for all people who had never been able to watch him play, just go back and watch a lot of highlight reels or watch some games on YouTube of him, and you'll see it. He made it look so easy, yet when you read into him and kind of do your homework on him, we see how hard he worked. They used to be, he still may have it up on Instagram. I think he has, I know he has a website, but he used to have his off-season workout regimen, which was always really interesting because I know he was very big on running up hills. And as a child, I know his father was in construction, and he used to help his father, and his father would toss bricks to him, and he would catch them. So, that would explain a lot of the talent that he acquired over time. It also helped the fact that he had, hit the microphone, humongous hands. And let's not forget that he went to a very small college, Mississippi Valley State, and went on to have, one of the greatest career football player I could ever have.
Highlights. Could I ask you a question about that play?
He tripped on the center's second step, right?
Hold on. There it is, right here.
But can I ask you a question, too? Because, he almost falls, by the way. You catch it, T.O. That hit right there probably would have been a penalty today. Are you hurt right here, or are you just like, my God?
No, literally, it gives me chills to see this.
Yeah.
Because immediately I thought about my grandma.
Wow, dude.
Immediately.
Wow.
Yeah, for anyone who's never seen that game, it was, I remember screaming so loud when he caught that touchdown, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. He took a shot when he caught that ball. I believe the gentleman who hit him was a safety by the name of Leroy Butler. I could be wrong, because that was a damn good Green Bay Packer team, still with Brett Favre. Try and think of the other receivers that he had at the time. I can't think of some of the receivers he had at the time, but I think Edgar Bennett was on that team as a running back, and George Kuntz, and I think Reggie White was on that team. I could be wrong, but it was a hell of a team. Keith Jackson, Sean Jones. So yeah, go back and look at that catch. It definitely goes down as one of the. First of all, it was an amazing throw from Steve Young. He threw it into He threw it where only Steve Young could possibly do, because he was the master at threading the needle and putting the ball where it had to be accurately. And it was a great catch by Terrell Owens, man. And it's only sad that we couldn't go on to win the Super Bowl from that, because we were a pretty good team that year under head coach Mariucci.
Everything is Jerry Rice. If I had Joe Montana and I had Steve Young, I would have had 5,000 more yards. I would have had 50 more touchdowns. And okay, it's a great argument that could have been made. And then running out of the two choices they had, they threw to me. And, instead of going to Jerry, I'm the one that caught the ball. We won. We beat Green Bay. Boom. And earlier, JJ interception. Then, I asked about the hill. I would have thought for sure you trained with him with the hill. You said you never went up the 2.5 mile hill with him. Okay, I got that. And then also there was a couple other comments you made about Jerry with him. You give him respect, but the language I'm getting from what you're saying is you feel you were a much better receiver than
Here
Jerry
it
Rice. Is that a fair question? I had the potential to be that. The statistics doesn't say that, but longevity wise, like I said, that's where it stands. And I'm always going to give him respect in that regard. But there's a lot of people that watch our game and you kind of look at how he played the game and how I played the game. A lot of people could probably say that, yeah, I would have been better than Jerry. But obviously, like I said, based on my genetic makeup, I feel like I could have eclipsed a lot of things had I been able and afforded the opportunity to play 3 or 4 more years. I would have threatened a lot of his records, and it would have been really, it would have been a no brainer. It would have been very distinctive as who is the best receiver of all time. Obviously, does championships come into play? Depends on who you talk to, because there's a lot of great athletes that don't have championships. That doesn't mean that they're not champions. I mean, I always say, like, yeah, I don't have a championship, a Super Bowl championship ring, but I played like a champion. And so for me, I don't need the.
All right, so a lot of stuff going on there. Had he would have played longer, given his genetic makeup, he would have eclipsed a lot of Jerry Rice's records. We don't know if that's true because it shoulda, woulda, coulda. I mean, he did play long into his career, right? He played till he's about 37. Could he have played 3-4 more years? Maybe in today's game? Sure, why not? But that doesn't mean that he would have broken the records, because we don't know how much he would have been utilized, how he would have been a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 wide receiver, what team he was on, what have you. He does mention the championships. Do championships matter? Yes, they do. They matter. Now, of course, you can always bring the argument up to the point that Dan Marino doesn't have a championship. The great Jim Kelly. And again, it's unfortunate. They're still in the upper echelon of quarterbacks, of players. But those who do have a chip or 2 chips or 3 chips, yes, I do think it matters. And yes, I do think it matters that Jerry Rice has multiple chips and Terrell Owens doesn't have any, because of the fact of how important Jerry Rice was to the 49ers, and that he was the greatest wide receiver and football player in his. I mean, look at the stats. That's another thing. Look at how many games he missed, other than that one season where he tore his ACL in the opening game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and still came back against the Denver Broncos, then unfortunately broke his kneecap. Other than that season, he was always playing, and he did it long into his, like I said before, late 30s, early 40s, where he was still banging 1,000 yards out, and probably could have still played even longer in that season with the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos, which was his last run. Okay? I'm not knocking Terrell Owens, but there's no way he would have been better than Jerry Rice. And look, Owens may have been a different specimen than he was. Maybe Owens had a lot more muscle tone. Probably. He was I think he was 6'3", as opposed to Jerry Rice being 6'2", and maybe outweighed him a little bit more in weight. But again, we're talking about someone who played the game at the height of the most physical part of the NFL and did damage with it, and then carried that over into the 90s and the 2000s and was always a threat. So it's a little hard to take what he's saying. And again, I'm not mock. I love Terrell Owens, but I would expect him. I would have really, if he would have said no. I mean, I get what he's trying to do, but again, I think everything speaks for itself, and he does pay him some respect. He does, but and maybe it's just Patrick Bet-David trying to be a good and interesting podcast host and ask a lot of risky seesaw type questions that a lot of people want to hear. We'll listen to a little bit more of this.
The championship to validate what I did on the football field. I think the statistics, your optics, if you watch how I play the game, it speaks for itself. There's a lot of things that Jerry did that I couldn't do early on in my career, but there's a lot of things I caught up very, very, very in a short period of time. When you think about the speed in which we play, I became faster than Jerry. Some of the things that I struggled with in early on in my career was drop balls.
Okay, here's the problem though with that comment. He was much younger than Jerry Rice when he came into the league. Jerry had been in the league for multiple years before that. So yeah, you should be faster than him because you're 22, 23, 24, And Rice was still a damn good wide receiver, even into his later years. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a little bit biased, but that doesn't really say much. Obviously, you should be faster than he was. Maybe he did catch up to some of the things that he wasn't as good at. I mean, he's humble enough to say that he dropped balls. He wasn't running routes correctly. Yeah, he probably did do that better. But to say that you could have potentially done that better than Jerry Rice, I just think that's no way at all. And let's hear a little more.
You're a fan of NBA. I'm assuming you've watched The Last Dance, and I'm assuming you know the stats and all that. You know the arguments. The arguments: Michael versus LeBron, Michael, Kobe. And then boom. Well, Michael's got 6 out of 6. Never went to Game 7. LeBron, blah blah blah.
Michael, Kobe, LeBron. That's my order.
Michael, LeBron, Kobe.
No, Michael, Kobe, LeBron.
Oh, you have Kobe ahead of LeBron.
Okay, that's a very interesting thing that he says, and I will agree with him on that. Although I'm biased because I'm a big Laker fan, I'm going to go Kobe. Jordan, I don't know if LeBron is number 3. I'm sorry, man. And I respect and love LeBron, but I don't think I don't know if he's number 3. There's a, and I know this is a football podcast, but I just have to say that. But I think there's a lot of other good players, great players that don't get the recognition that they deserve that could possibly be in that spot. But yeah, T.O. is a very big NBA guy, and if you guys, I don't know how many of you guys remember, he was a pretty decent basketball player too. He said something I didn't show, and I apologize for it looking a little bit backward, just the way my camera angle is. But he talked about him coming out of a small school too, which was Tennessee Chattanooga, very similar to Jerry Rice coming out of Mississippi Valley State. So that's something that they had a lot in common. I think they did have a lot in common. I like the way he pays a lot of respect to Jerry for that, and also says how a lot of people didn't throw a lot of eyes on him because he came out of a small school, which kind of reminds me of Brock Purdy, not so much of the school he came out of, but where he was drafted. So, again, it's always these things that a lot of scouts overlook, the players that come out of small schools or where they're going to end up in the draft, or maybe some of the lack of stats they have in college, and look what happens. And again, this comes down to nobody really knows how good someone's going to be until we see them. And again, early on in Terrell Owens' career, we did see him struggle, but he turned into, again, one of the best wide receivers ever.
In your mind, do you kind of tell yourself, I didn't have the longevity that, like, do you look at Jerry as Kareem and yourself as Michael?
Yeah, I could say that.
That's what I'm hearing from what you're saying.
I could say that. Yeah, sure, I could say that. Yeah.
So you think you're MJ?
So he feels that he was, Jordan to Rice's being Kareem. I could understand that analogy being that, or maybe, I don't, even if they would have said his Kareem, Jerry's Kareem to Magic's, to his being Magic Johnson, I could understand that because of the way they were drafted and who was older and who was younger. I could sort of understand that, but I can't because, again, and I'm not trying to be biased here, I think that unless you're I'm not going to say unless you're a true blue 49er fan. I don't want to do that because I hate that stupid, silly argument. Everyone's got an opinion, and I totally understand. There are people who came along rooting for the 49ers after Jerry had played that saw Terrell Owens, and, so it's objective. I mean, it's subjective for that matter. But in this case, I don't think it is. I think that obviously Jerry was the better wide receiver. Again, in the Mount Rushmore of wide receivers, I always say there is no Mount Rushmore. There's Jerry Rice. And everything else after that is, don't get me wrong, they were great wide receivers. I mean, there's Terrell Owens, there's Randy Moss, there's Larry Fitz, there's Tim Brown, there's just Lance Allworth. There's so many others. I mean, throughout the history of the NFL, and we're seeing so many more that are going to be up and coming. Whether it's Justin Jefferson, Antonio Brown, no, sorry, great wide receiver, great talent, but no, I don't put him up there. I'm sorry. It's very hard to say you're better than anyone that statistically you're not, and you don't have rings like they do. I'm sorry. It's just very hard to say that. I respect his self-confidence and his work ethic. I think he's one of the hardest working football players there ever was, and it's amazing to see how good he looks at the young age of 49, and he's pretty much still in playing shape. So,
I don't know, I don't want to put Calvin Johnson. Where do you put yourself against Randy Moss? You and Randy.
I feel like I'm better than Randy Moss.
You think you're better than Randy?
Yeah, because of how I played the game. I played every facet of the game. I didn't just play receiver. Randy played when he wanted to, and he said that. And I'm not.
He said that. Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you look at my coach George Stewart, like I owe a lot of what I became to my coaches at every stop, pretty much. Larry Kersey, George Stewart, and when I went to Philadelphia Eagles, it was David Culley, and when I went to Dallas, it was Ray Sherman.
I like that he said he was better than Randy Moss. He was better than Randy Moss. Randy Moss was a great talent, but I think that Owens had better hands. Owens ran better routes, and Owens was a little bit more physical than Randy Moss, who was more of, if you remember when he played with Dante Culpepper, had a lot more better leaping ability and the ability to catch tough passes thrown to him, in crowds or very high up. So, yeah, he was better than Randy Moss. Okay, this next question by Patrick Bet-David, I was listening to this when I was driving my car. I almost had to hit the brakes because I was like, uh-oh. Ready?
You can divert with that route, go down the field, you can come across, or you can come back to the quarterback.
Who was greater, Joe Montana or Jerry Rice?
Joe Montana, I would probably say Joe Montana.
So then that says a lot. So if you have a pick and you got two players in the draft ahead that you can pick up, you got Joe and Jerry. Do you pick up Joe or Jerry? You're saying Joe.
Yeah, Joe or Steve?
No. It's Joe and Jerry.
Joe and Jerry.
There's a reason why I'm asking this question. Say you're in the draft.
I'm gonna go with Joe.
Why is that? Why Joe over Jerry?
Joe Montana over
Yes.
Jerry? Because Joe, I mean, just think about his acumen of a quarterback. When you think about precision and timing and what I watched and what I learned about the West Coast offense, Joe is accurate. He can get out of the pocket when need to. He wasn't as mobile as a Steve Young, but he reminds me, and I think, of a Tom Brady. He knows when and where to put the ball. His ball placement, his timing.
What he didn't mention there was Joe was better than Tom Brady. Sorry, not being biased, not getting into the argument, but Joe was better than Tom Brady. Thank God I don't know why. I mean, it was an interesting question to ask who was better, Joe or Jerry Rice. I understand that. Like, I understand what you're trying to say. I don't even want to think about that because I'm just blessed that we as 49er fans had both of them on the same team, man. It is something interesting to think about, though. Once Joe had moved on to the Kansas City Chiefs, Steve Young was able to have one of the greatest quarterback to wide receiver relationships with Jerry Rice. So could one say that perhaps you could say who was the best, Jerry Rice, Steve Young, or Joe Montana? Maybe you could have said it that way too, because again, Young was able to pick up where Montana left off and do his own damage. Maybe he didn't win as many championships as he did, but he also wasn't a starter at the time, and maybe had he would have been, he could have. I don't know. It's something I don't really want to think about because, I love all these guys, but it is an interesting concept to think about. But it's a really good question that Bet-David asked Terrell Owens, I think. And again, as Niner fans, it's something that, you when you're sitting around, I guess, with other Niner fans, you can have that conversation or just like, well, what if? I think it's more of a what if type thing because it's, obviously it never happened. It never happened it did happen that they weren't on the same team at one point, but, to say who's more valuable, I don't know. I mean, that's one thing Terrell Owens does say that I really like is he talked about the acumen that Joe Montana played with, the way he was precise, the way he could put the ball, given he was in an offense that fit him well. He was a third-round pick. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the biggest. He didn't have the greatest arm, but it didn't matter because that's what great quarterbacks do. And I'm going to say this, and I'll probably get a lot of whatever, but I don't care. I see some of that in Brock Purdy, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that. I think a lot of people feel that way. Obviously, he does have a long way to go, but I think that I do see that ability in him.
And knowing me as a receiver, what I can do once I get my hands on
Joe or Young?
I get Joe. Still Joe Montana. Yeah, Joe Montana.
Tom, you know why I'm asking this question? I'm asking this question because if in your as a receiver, if you believe you're a better receiver, you running with Joe, you think you would have had better numbers than Jerry running with Joe for the same amount of years?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's where I was going with it.
Yeah. I got because I think if you look at how I played, I was able to break a lot.
All right, so obviously he was talking about how if he would have been able to have the opportunity to play with Joe Montana, he would have had better numbers than Jerry Rice. Again, that's kind of Monday morning quarterback to some extent, and who knows if that would have even been it. It wasn't though. It just whatever. It is what it is. He goes for Joe Montana over Steve Young. Again, that's an argument and a conversation I never like to have because I love both of them dearly. I'm just humbled and blessed they were both 49ers and that they both won chips as 49ers, and I think that's all that matters at the end of the day. It is a really good podcast. I recommend you listen to it. I have not heard the one on All the Smoke, and I really love All the Smoke. I think Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes are phenomenal. I love the questions they ask. But this, I really like Patrick Bet-David too, and his style in which he interviews, because he is a big sports guy, he's a big football guy, and I like that he gives these guys the stage and the ability and the time to explain themselves. And he asks them rather very interesting, deep, in-depth questions that you wouldn't see asked a lot of the time. And if you go and listen to the interview, Terrell Owens goes to talk about his controversy with Keyshawn Johnson, Stephen A. Smith. Then again, I'm not surprised that he has a controversy. He doesn't have. Stephen A. Smith is a pain fucking ass big mouth who I just can't stand. He also talks about Colin Kaepernick a little bit. He also talks about some very interesting and unfortunate racist things that went on with the so-called coach in San Francisco. He does not name the coach, but I think that we can kind of figure it out for ourselves. It was really unfortunate that went on. I think it's good that he didn't mention the coach too. Not trying to throw anybody under the bus, although of course we all know that. There's no surprise to me that there was and is racism in sports. I mean, I can't believe that still goes on, which is so ignorant and stupid. But it is, it's a very unfortunate thing. But he does go to mention that in the interview. So if you get a chance, definitely go and check it out. I hope you liked this segment with this that we did. Again, I apologize for some of the pictures in the interview being backwards to some extent, but you were able to basically get the idea. Let me know how you feel about this with some comments and questions. I'm always happy and humbled to hear from you guys. Ninernut is out. Niners have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming up this week. Should be another victory, man, but we will wait and see. I'll have more content coming at you later on this week. Peace.